so we're just going to go ahead and get started. My name is Messi Kipenda, and I'll be joined today by Isabella Bayalas. But we're going to be teaching this class. It's a two-part series. This is the first part of the permitting the new model. And so the first class is going to be today, and the next one is going to be, I think, next week. But this is the first of the two-part series. This is what we're going to go through today. We're going to go through the introduction, why we created a new model, introducing new models. We're going to go in detail every section of the new model, both the non-structural and the structural model permit. We're also going to talk about the request for information, which is the document that comes with these permits. And then at the end, we're going to go through some key takeaways. We have a couple of people today all over the state and around the country, which has been awesome. Thank you for joining us. We have people from as far as Kansas City and Chicago who are registered for the class. So we're glad to join us. Thank you. Right, so we're just gonna get into so communities manage development in the special flood hazard area as a condition of joining the NFIP. So this is based on an agreement that the federal government will make flood insurance available within communities that adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations to reduce the flood risk to new floodplain development. These regulations are found in your local ordinance, which is adopted by the community. And then any development in the special flood hazard area must have written permission or needs to be permitted prior to start of construction. Just a note, this class is not about the regulations for development in the floodplain. We're only going to be talking about the process of using the model permit and how that process is done. If you want to learn about the regulation that applies to either it's a residential, what to do with a residential and non-residential and things like that, that would be for our basic floodplain management class, which would be on December 11th. Yeah, that will be a class that you learn more about that. So look out for that class. Under the NFIP, the development is defined as any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation or drilling operations, or storage of equipment or materials. It's quite a handful of a definition, but it just covers everything that is considered as a development in the floodplain. So whatever you do in the floodplain that will change the real estate of it, that is considered a development. So even just storage of materials, if you're storing materials in the floodplain, that would need to be permitted as well because it is considered as development. It's not just structures in the floodplain. So why is this process necessary? First of all, it is a requirement of the National Flood Insurance Program participation. Once you join the program, you agree to enforcing the regulations, and part of that is permitting. When you permit a development, you make sure that it is in compliant to the regulations, and so this is one of the most important duties of a floodplain administrator. So this process is very necessary. It also improves community resilience by ensuring that structures are reasonably protected from flood hazards by being in compliant with your ordinance. It also when we do have what we call audits, usually it's a community assistant contact or a community assistant visit. We would ask for these documents during those meetings. So you have to have the permits and you have to keep them in perpetuity. You always have to have them, whether it's paper or it's digital. On how you keep them, you just always need to have them. Also, unpermitted development within your community is considered a violation, and most unresolved violations can jeopardize the community standing with the NFIP. So you could either have a probation or suspended from the program. Usually probation doesn't affect your insurance. It will just, but there could be a charge on all new policies when you're during that period of probation, which usually lasts for a year. However, suspension takes away your flood insurance for all members of the community. So you need to make sure that this stage is done properly so that you do not have any violations in your community. Also, it can be tough conversations that you may need to have with your citizens if you miss this step and the property owner went ahead and made a new construction that was non-compliant. It will usually fall back on the floodplain administrator and the community if they did not permit that structure. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Nebraska model permits. We're going to start with the ORD permit, which was released in June 2020, which I'm sure most of you have used as I responded to the poll. So this one was still available on our website. The only reason that we created a new one was to make it easier to use. People had expressed confusion on who needs to fill out what and what documents are required. And so we just went ahead and made a new model that was more user-friendly and most easy to use. However, this old permit is still available if you still want to use the model permit. We do not require communities to use our model permits. You can modify it to how you want your community to look like, but we just provide a model for you to use. It is not required, but they're always available for communities to use. The new model permit came out this June, I'm sure, and has separate permits for structural and non-structural development. It has got a more process-focused format with clear division between applicant and floodplain administrator responsibility. It also comes with instructions on how to fill out different sections. And then it has an additional document, which is called the request for information. we're going to talk more about this section as we go through the class, but this is just an overall view of the new model permit applications. As I mentioned, this new model permit is customizable to your community. So once you download the permit from our website, I'm sure we had sent out links and maybe even a copy of this permit. So once you download them from their website, there are multiple ways to edit it. You can either use Word or Adobe Acrobat and then convert it to Word. Edit the paragraph to Adobe or another PDF editor. And then you're going to insert your community office address and floodplain administrator contact information. So you take out that wording there and put the information that needs to be there. You also place your community's jurisdiction seal on the place that says place jurisdiction seal. And then you can also do other modifications to make it more community friendly. Yeah, so you can either open it with Word or you can edit it with Adobe Acrobat. We're going to start with the non-structural model permit. So this permit is best for projects that are non-structural. This could be mining, grading, or storage of materials, equipment. The reason why we separated the two was because the structural permit is more intensive. It has got more places that you need to fill in things. And so we wanted to make a more easier looking non-structural that you could easily just check in the boxes that are needed for this type of development. And so it's a simpler format of the model permit with clear sections and quick check boxes. The permit also has instruction on how to fill out the different sections. We're going to go through the sections of this permit. So section A is the applicant and property info section. So if the applicant is different from the owner, they need to fill in both the owner information and the applicant information. An applicant would be someone that the property owner has given permission to fill out the permit. You also need to fill in the site information, location of project, so that the floodplain administrator can be able to counter check using our interactive map to know where this development is taking place. Section B is project description, where you put the project narrative, you include activities, and you include submittal forms with the application. The project narrative space is a little bit small in the permit, so you can attach extra pages to provide more information on the project narrative. Yeah. Section C is the applicant certification. So this is where the applicant certifies that they're going to follow the permit, and then they sign and print out their name and date. And then when you move to section D, which is the floodplain administrator review and requirements, they're going to go through project requirements, flood zone determination, best flood elevation, flood regulations, and then finally approve or deny the permit or otherwise request for more information. So we're going to go a little bit more into section A, completed by the applicant. So this asks for owner information, as I mentioned, and the applicant information. So even if the applicant is not the owner of the prop of the development, they'll still need to add in owner information. And then the applicant could be a surveyor, an engineer, anyone that the property owner has given permission to fill out the permit. You also include site location information right at the bottom here. So you put in the address, CD, state, parcel number, lot, block, or subdivision. All that information will need to be put into the permit as required. Next. The project narrative is a description of the project. As I mentioned, you could attach extra papers in case there is, you need to add more information to the project narrative. You are allowed to attach more papers that you put in that narrative. The checklist for included development activities. So this is just everything else that is in addition to whatever that you're doing for that development. So will it have a water course alteration? Does it have a subdivision, recreation vehicle park? All these checkboxes will need to be checked in as required to the development. You also need to include submitted documents that you will submit in support of your permit application. So this can be a no-rise, site-specific BFEs, grading plan, all that information. You're going to check it in here and then add it to the permit application. If there's anything missing, then the floodplain administrator will send you that request for more information. Next. Section C is the certification, which is signed by the applicant. They're acknowledging that the work will conform to the permit. They're acknowledging that elevation floodproofing to required flood protection elevations. They're also acknowledging that as built lowest flow data will be provided post-construction. So this is specifically saying that you are going to adhere to the permit and that everything that you have said will be done on this development is what you're going to adhere to. And so you put your signature and the date. Section D is filled out by the floodplain administrator. So this allows the community to indicate the requirements for the development. It also works somewhat like a checklist so that you make sure that everything that is needed for this permit application has been included. So you're going to look at the FEMA flood zone. Is it an A zone? Is it an AE zone? Each of these zones may trigger some more processes to be done. For example, if it is in the floodway, you already know that there will not be anything there that would have humans habitation there, but this is another structural model permit. But just in case they have that, then this will trigger some more information. Best flood elevations, which is usually 1 foot above the best flood elevation. But for some communities, they have a 2-foot elevation. And so we left this open for them. And then you could also describe where you got the BFE. Is it from us? Is it from a surveyor? That would need to be indicated here. And then there's also other questions, other yes or no questions that you need to answer. Is it the proposed development in an A or AE zone without a designated floodplain, or that would need to be checked in? And then once you are satisfied with this section, you're going to go ahead to either approve or deny the permit. or ask for additional information. In case you did not understand well, or there's something that is missing from the permit application, you can always request for more information from the applicant before you deny or approve the permit. There's also permit approved date and permit expiry date. This may be more for structural developments, but some developments would go on for a long time and that permit would have expired by now. Once that permit expires, they'll need to file in another permit so that it can continue going through after its expiry date. So that is another neat thing that we put in for the new model permits.
How long are the permits good for?
Usually about a year. As I mentioned on the flood plain information, flood zone identification, best flood elevation, you're going to put in all that, the source of the BFE. Did you use a firm? Did you use a flood insurance study? Or was it from us? Some developments that are in zone A, you may be able to request that best flood elevation from our team. And so you do indicate that here. And then you also are going to go ahead and tick on these yes or no questions, just to also keep you in the know of what the development is about. You might also need some extra submittal documents. For example, is there no rise required? Is it less than half-foot rise required? All those will need to be taken care of in this section. Next. And then section D is basic requirements, that is following the basic standards for all development. These will all usually have to be yes or not applicable. You should not have a no on here. For all the permits to be approved, all this will need to be checked in as yes. The application determination now includes 4. As I mentioned, approval with signature and expiry date. Construction must start within 180 days for the permit to be valid. If you deny, or you could ask for more information. And even when you deny a permit, you should let the applicant know why you have denied the permit, so that if they need to go back and do something else, or if they need to correct anything, then they're able to. And you need to be consistent with every permit that you deny or approve. It should all have the same standard. Excuse me. And then if you do need to have additional information, you can use that request for more information. So this is basically how the non-structural development model permit looks like. It's a 2-page, and this is once you download it, or even if you're using the fillable, this is how the format will look like. And then this is the instructions that it has on the back. So whenever you're not sure about a section, or you need to go back and counter check about a section, we have instructions that go section by section, letting you know what needs to be put in that section. And now we're going to go through to the structural model permit, which is going to be done by Isabella.
Before we switch over, we do have one question in the chat.
Okay.
Douglas County uses an online permit and application portal for all permits, which they've incorporated everything from the paper application into the online application. And they'll most likely modify that to reflect the new model. And all submittals are done through that portal as well. And they want to know if it's acceptable to do them online, or are they required to be applied, and approved on paper.
No, communities are allowed to modify their permits the way they see fit, as long as it takes care of all the compliance questions that we need answered. So it could either be paper, it could be online. It doesn't really matter to us, as long as you are doing the work that it should do, which is addressing all the regulations that are in your local ordinance. So if that's what you're using as a community, that is completely fine by us. You're not required to use the exact model permit.
We'll get started with the structural model permit now. So again, with the structural permit, this is just a simpler, more functional format of the model development permit with clear sections and easy checkboxes. So this form may be used for structural developments, such as residential, non-residential, multi-use, accessory, etc. But it also still contains all of the selections for non-structural development. So if you just want to keep only one permit on file for people to use, you can use this for both non-structural and structural. But there's also the option created with the non-structural if you would like to simplify it a little bit more and use a separate one for each. So a little overview of the structural development model permit. It is laid out in the same format as the non-structural, with section A, including the applicant and property information, applicant info and owner information if they're different, and site information. Section B is the project description, have the narrative box again, structure usage and included activities, foundation type, and included submittal forms with the application. Section C, again, this is just the certification again. It certifies the agreement, it complies with permit requirements. And section D is once again the floodplain administrator's review and requirements, talking about the flood zone, the base flood elevation, required flood protection elevation, regulatory requirements, and substantial improvement determination. And this also has the review and requirements, the post-construction requirements, no rise or less than 1 foot rise determination, building requirements, and required submittal documents. So going a little bit further in depth on those. So section A, the top of the application is completed by the applicant. It asks for the owner information or the applicant information if it's different than the owner, such as the surveyor, the engineer, etc. And then also the site location. Section B is describing the project. You have the narrative space, which again, if your narrative is too long to be included in that little box, you can attach a separate document to the application, so it's complete. This section B also identifies if the application is for a new or existing structure. It identifies intended structure type and usage, and now includes a foundation type checkboxes and enclosure size information. We wanted to have this all laid out nice and easy so the floodplain administrator is getting as much information as possible right off the bat without having to go back too many times to the applicant to ask more questions. Since our previous permit, it was missing some of these factors that didn't make it quite as clear to the FPA when they would receive that application, what exactly is going on with the project and what steps and forms are required. Continuing on with section B, this also contains the non-structural development activity checklist, like I said. And since also usually structural projects also include the other activities such as grading or maybe including a deck on the house or fencing, just a multitude can go into doing structural development. So the applicant should check off also all the non-structural activities that they're doing as well. Or again, you can just use this as your non-structural development permit in addition to structural. And then at the bottom of section B is the submittal document checklist. This is for the applicant to check off what they've included in their application. It keeps it nice and organized, lets the FPA know what they're getting and it helps them figure out what they still need. Or maybe if they checked off a less than 1 foot rise determination, but there's not one attached to the document, you can ask, hey, did this get lost? And just make sure you're keeping all the information together and accounted for. One thing I forgot to mention, that at the top of each page in that right corner, there's a permit number box, and that's where you can write down the specific permit number for this project. As we will continue on, this is more than just a front and back. Sadly, this one had to be included on 4 pages as we couldn't condense it down enough to 2. So filling out those separate permit number boxes that's on the top of each page will help you keep together all those documents in case things get a little messed up and confused. You have that nice little reference point to keep track of everything. So section C is the signed certification from the applicant. As you notice, this is much longer than the non-structural development permit application. This includes the acknowledgement that work must conform to the permit, and then also acknowledging elevation and flood proofing is required to flood protection elevations, and acknowledging as-built lowest floor must be provided post-construction. As with our last permit, there wasn't a good descriptor or pointing out of that post-construction elevation certificate and proof. So this just is letting the applicant know right off the bat that one of those is required for the permitting process. So with that, that ends the applicant's portion of the form. So moving into section D, this one is much longer again. It's filled out by the floodplain administrator. And this allows the floodplain administrator to establish requirements that the applicant must follow once construction begins. And yeah, it is much, much more comprehensive than the previous model. We really wanted to emphasize on making this flow much better throughout the permitting process for both the applicant and the FPA. And we thought creating this floodplain administrator section and having it be this inclusive would really help with that and laying out all the separate steps and requirements for development. So closer look at this. It starts with the floodplain information, such as the flood zone identification, the base flood elevation, and then the required flood protection elevation, which is typically the base flood elevation +1, but we kept it blank for communities with a higher freeboard, like Mercy mentioned, maybe a +2 plus the BFE. Moving into regulatory requirements. In residential, there's a spot to list the minimum lowest floor elevation, which you would base that off of. That would be the same as your flood protection elevation, that BFE +1 or more if that's your community. It also includes enclosure requirements, such as the flood openings and making sure that the applicants are complying and are aware of that requirement for 2 flood vents, 1 square inch for every enclosed foot of enclosed space. And also a section for minimum required elevation of utilities and equipment. Again, typically the same as the lowest floor elevation. So in the non-residential section, there are permitted mitigation method. This allows the FPA to mark the method that are allowed for compliance, since non-residential has a little bit more leeway where they could be dry flood proofed or wet flood proofed in addition to that elevation. Wanted to give that an option so that it's nice and laid out, making sure that all of our bases are covered. Includes the enclosure requirements, again, the flood openings, ensuring that there's plenty of them and they are large enough. And also the mitigation method for utilities and equipment, since they can also be elevated or dry flood proofed. In the substantial improvement determination section, it's used for any improvements, including repairs of any kind to existing structures. That's why back in the beginning, in section B, we had an area for if this is a new structure or an existing structure. So it separates those out nice and easy so you know if you need to fill out this section of the permit. It follows the calculations to determine the percent cost. It gives you the little formula right there. This does not account for communities with a lower threshold or cumulative cost tracking, but it can be modified. As Mercy said, when we talked about customizing this to your community, you can go into a PDF editor or have it in Word and just change that percentage to whatever you need, whatever your community's threshold is. And then again, the post-construction requirements. Post-construction elevations of the lowest floor are required for any structures built in the floodplain. Just any zone, any plane that is required. And this lists it nice out and easy, makes everyone aware of that, as that can often be a forgotten step or an overlooked step. Structures that are dry floodproof must have their post-construction certification from an engineer. Again, just another piece that is required if we're using dry flood proofing. And you need to make sure to remind the applicant of this requirement before construction starts. So as I said, these things can get overlooked. People think they fill out the permit, gets approved, great, they're done. But there is this after construction step that's very important to remember and is part of the permitting process as a whole. So if you don't have those post-construction elevation certificates or dry flood proofing, then that permitting process is not complete and not compliant with the NFIP regulations. So then it moves on to floodway information. If it asks if a no rise is required for this activity, and that's a yes for all developments within the floodway. And just a little reminder that no structures for human habitation are allowed in the floodway whatsoever, even if they're elevated. That's just a no. The permit is immediately denied if they check or if they say that this is for human habitation in the floodway. And then it asks, is a less than 1 foot rise determination required? Yes, if in A zone or AE zone without a floodway. And permits cannot be approved without these certifications. These are filled out or done by certified engineers, and yes, very important and required of all development. Moving in to just that basic requirement section following the CFR 60.3A that applies to every single development, no matter structural, non-structural. All must be yes for permit to be approved, unless not applicable, like Mercy said. And again, HVAC and utilities should be protected to the same elevation as the lowest floor. So yeah, this is just a nice little comprehensive checklist that makes sure you are double checking on each of these required little segments of your ordinance. So, and then we move into the required submittal documents. This allows the floodplain administrator to check required supporting documents. An asterisk indicates if there's additional information below, such as you can see, you might require site-specific BFEs if a large subdivision is larger than 5 acres or 50 lots, then they're required to go and get their own BFEs done. The state doesn't provide that even if it's within the an A zone. So just a couple little reminders below there in the asterisks. And then the FPA has the authority to request additional information if necessary. The burden of proof is on the applicant. They can't get upset and ask you to provide something. That is on them to give that information to you. If you do need additional information, that is where the request for information comes in handy, which we'll get to after this. So yeah, this is where you can check off what you know that they need for this development. And then you can also go back and kind of compare it to what the applicant said they submitted with their document, to just a nice, easy, laid out way to see if they're missing anything instead of comparing documents and going back and forth. You just have these 2 checklists you can look at and compare. And then application determination, same as the non-structural. It includes the approval with the signature for the expiration date. Like we said, construction must start within 180 days for the permit to be valid. If they don't start construction on those projects 180 days after the approval, then they're required to go back and do another floodplain development application. There's also the spot for the denial, and then a spot to request additional information, and then if you do check that, you will include the request for information sheet with the permit application when you return it to the applicant. So just looking over the whole permit, like we said, sadly, this couldn't be fit onto 2 pages. So we had to do 4 pages, but we at least were able to keep it. There's the page that the applicant needs to fill out, and then there's the floodplain administrator's area to fill out. Give you guys a nice overview of this. And here are the instructions that the structural permit has as well. We really wanted these instructions to be nice and comprehensive and explain the process much better to both the applicant and the floodplain administrator, especially for floodplain administrators that don't have to do these permits super often. It can be very overwhelming, so we're really hopeful that these will walk you through the process a little more, make you feel a little bit more sure in what you're doing. Moving on to the request for information form. This is a brand new form. We didn't have a previous version of this. So we're very excited that this will kind of fill in a gap of the permitting process that was a little ambiguous before with our previous model. So after an applicant fills out their application and they're missing some information, you can just nicely include this with that returned application, just check off what's missing, and it's nice and easy. They have that proof, that written out document that states exactly what they're missing. And the FPA can set an expiration or a due date for when this information must be provided. And if that applicant fails to provide the information in time, they'll just have to fill out a new application so that the FPA isn't trying to track the person down in those small communities or trying to keep track of their papers all over if it becomes just too drawn out and going for too long. Yeah. How it works, the applicant submits application for the permit using sections A through C, like we just mentioned, with the FPA doing section D. And if they're missing an item to support compliance with the local ordinance, the floodplain administrator then uses this RFI to mark which item or items are missing. You can return this to the applicant with that permit, or with the application for the permit, so they have a grocery list of what they need. Once they return the information and it's correct, then the original permit may be approved. Just a note that when the FPA signs off on the RFI, that is not you approving the permit. That's just you acknowledging this form, but you will still, if they do use the RFI and return that missing information to you, you still need to go back and sign that original permit application, since that permit, once it's signed, becomes the permit. This RFI does not okay the permit to go on. Just a little example, if someone was building a new house and they filled everything out, it looked okay, but they're missing their less than 1 foot rise determination for their zone A new structure. You can fill out up at the top the permit number to keep it nice and aligned so you don't get mixed up and confused what's for what project. You can put requested by, most often it will be the floodplain administrator, your date requested, your information, and the expiration date if you'd like. You will then check off that less than 1 foot rise determination, and then you will sign at the bottom so that they know it's from you, and then hand that back to them. They'll get that less than 1 foot rise determination and give it back to you. You can review it, make sure everything's okay. And once it looks okay, then you can go back to the original permit and sign it off and approve that permit for development. So this RFI also comes with instructions. They're a lot shorter since it's a much smaller form, but these are also available on our website under the digital desk reference if you need them. Key takeaways. The new permit and the RFI should help the permitting process flow more smoothly. As we said, that last permit just was a little clunky. It didn't have the best layout. It wasn't very clear on who needed to do what. So we really wanted to make this just much more usable and user-friendly. So these models and the instructions are both available on our website under the digital desk reference. Both a plain and fillable version are available in case you prefer to just print them out and have paper copies, or if you like to have those electronic forms. We made a fillable version so it's easy for people to fill out. And we also welcome feedback on making them better and more usable. That was our main goal in creating these new models, is we really just wanted to make them better and easier for floodplain administrators to use. So if you think there's something that could be better or done differently, please just let us know. We welcome that. And thank you for social media. There's a lot of content on there since we merged agencies, but we still are posting training reminders, helpful tips, and all that. So if you'd like to give us a follow. And yep, that wraps up our presentation.